In spite of all our communication technology, no invention is as effective as the sound of the human voice. When we hear the human voice, we instinctively want to listen in the hopes of understanding it, even when the speaker is searching for the right words to say. That's because the human voice resonates differently from everything else in the world. This is the Unmistakable Creative Podcast. Listen in on candid conversations with creative entrepreneurs and insanely interesting people.
All right, everybody, welcome to another backstage episode of the Unmistakable Creative. This is Srini. I am here with my co-host, Greg Hartle. Greg, what's going on?
Hey, Srini. Not much. Just hanging out in Seattle. It's supposed to snow this week, so I'm kind of looking forward to that. I think this is my first snow this winter. And is it snowing in Boston? You're in Boston, right?
It was snowing in Boston. I was sitting in a Starbucks yesterday, and it started to snow in Boston. I hope that's the last snow I see this winter, because people from Southern California are not used to this. I looked and I was like, what is that white stuff falling from the sky, and why is it colder all of a sudden? I wouldn't leave the apartment yesterday that I'm at because of all the snow. I was like, I'm not going out there. Are you kidding me?
You're such a puss. Come on, put on a coat, go outside, have some fun.
I'm going to be meeting one of our listeners for dinner, and I'm basically dreading that portion of it. The getting to the restaurant part actually terrifies me because it's so cold outside.
That's hilarious.
Our listeners are, I'm sure as much as our listeners would love a Boston weather report, let's get into some of the feedback we got in, because we got some great feedback from last week and the weeks before episodes. Last week, for those of you guys who don't remember, if you haven't heard it yet, we really had an interesting discussion around whether we are moving from a human-made world into a machine-made world and how our creativity is going to play a role. Steve writes in, he says, we're moving more and more toward a world of choice. It's easier than ever to find people plus communities interested in what you're interested in. So if you want to be on the cutting edge of tech, you can get there. And he says, I think creativity plus technological advances go hand in hand rather than being mutually exclusive. What do you think, Greg?
Well, I think the people that can leverage both will do exceptionally well. And I don't think that the majority of people can leverage both. I think the idea that most of us understand technology or know how to manipulate it is not accurate. There's a select few in the grand scheme of things who do, but more and more of us need to understand how technology works and how to manipulate it. We don't need to necessarily know how to code something, but we need to know how code works. Mm-hmm. In my opinion, if we're going to really excel and do well. But I do agree with the idea that you can definitely combine creativity with technology and do very well.
Yeah, I mean that's more or less a lot of people who've been on this show, right? Their gift was their ability to combine creativity and technology, and
that is this show.
Yeah, it really is. I mean that's more or less every single person that we've talked to has combined creativity and technology in an unmistakable way.
Yeah, for the most part, for sure.
Yeah. Well, so Brandon writes in, you'll love this, Greg. I wanted to weigh in to say that Greg is wrong. Unless you are focused on short-term success, and he's referring to our debate about master of your craft or Renaissance person. If you look at historical figures who've made a significant impact in society, they all tend to have one thing in common, a broad knowledge base.
Yeah, and they also have other thing in common, which I've hopefully made clear now with the last two episodes, but hopefully I'll make it clear here, because I agree. I agree with, what was his name, Brandon? Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I agree, Brandon, I agree with you completely, 100%. And that's actually my point, which is if you are born highly intelligent or highly talented, you can be a Renaissance person and do very well in society. And the examples that people keep giving me are examples of the world's most genius people. And so, of course, they're going to be able to be Renaissance people. My point is if you are not born exceptionally talented or exceptionally intelligent, you are better likely to make a living mastering a particular skill. And that was the only point I was attempting to make there. And so I think I hope I'm making that point, because people keep saying that they disagree with me, but then they give examples of exactly the examples that I'm expressing. So I don't know.
Well, so feel free to write in and harass Greg some more, because clearly he's enjoying it, in case you guys can't tell. So let's do this. I think that actually makes a perfect setup to what we want to talk about today, which is this concept of the all or nothing internet. So I'm going to turn this over to you, Greg. I mean, what is the all or nothing internet?
Are you turning it over to me? Oh, fantastic. Yeah. All or nothing internet. Well, I don't know. You and I have had many conversations since we first started talking, actually. I think since the first time you interviewed me, which is, you always talk about the internet being somewhat like a developing country, where there's kind of the haves and the have-nots. Oh. And I tend to agree with that. I tend to think that while the barrier to entry has never been lower to get yourself involved, I think the reality is that the spoils are going to a select few. And if you look at Kickstarter campaigns, if you look at Twitter accounts that are really popular, if you look at web blogs that get the most views, et cetera, the skew, the bell curve, it's in the favor of a few.
Yeah.
It's definitely in the favor of a few. And so the question for me is it always going to be in the favor of a few? Is it going to become fewer and fewer at the top and then everyone else? Or is it going to start to spread and equal out amongst all of us? And that's a really important question, because the internet and software is driving so much of our society. It'll be interesting to see if it'll remain the haves and the have-nots, or if it'll even out somewhat.
Yeah, we'll see. The reason I always liken the internet to a developing country is, I mean, if we had a physical manifestation of the internet, and I'll make reference to this hilarious Dave Chappelle skit where he said, imagine if the internet was a real place you could actually go to. But I mean, if we had a physical manifestation of the current internet with, the social web, what you would see is it would be like $1 million neighborhoods next to abandoned heaps of trash. Mm-hmm. Just hundreds of thousands of abandoned heaps of trash, and a select few upscale neighborhoods, because that's what the web looks like in a physical manifestation. I mean, and I know because I've built some of those heaps of trash. I have many of them in my past. I can't tell you how many abandoned, half-started, literally they're like abandoned warehouses where, there's a footprint here, a footprint there. And I think that really honestly does describe the internet in its current state. And you're right. I think a select few people are reaping the rewards. I think that the income distribution is incredibly uneven, which we've talked about. I mean, we know the statistics. The question becomes, is there a way out of this? I mean, have we set ourselves up? I mean, have we just modeled what's going on in the real world economically and just taken it and put it on the internet? I mean, yes, it's the land of opportunity, but I don't know. I mean, I think that I wonder. And here's the thing with income inequality, from my experiences of living in developing countries, is that income inequality, as the rich get richer, the poor continually get poorer, and it just makes things worse. So I don't know that there is a way out.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's a huge conversation to unpack, but with a lot of implications there. But to try to keep it somewhat, in the short time frame that we have to have this conversation, I think that the things to consider here is the internet is no different than the non-internet, because it all involves us humans and software, and technology and what's happening to the world. So it doesn't really matter where you go; those same things exist. And I don't think it actually is going to even out. I think it will only continue to grow where there's the haves and the have-nots, and that's because that's what talent does, and that's what creativity does. It's always been that way across every industry. It's just that we've had more of an even distribution because we've needed more people to do things. But with the adoption of technologies as fast as we're adopting them now, we need less people to do things. So talent can get further ahead with less help, with less physical help, right? Yeah. And we're seeing that, even in our own business, where we just built a new platform for this show, right? And through the process of using technology to build this platform through software, it actually eliminated some of the physical work that had to be done that we were paying for. And that, to me, is only going to continue.
So I don't know about you, but vacuuming is not one of those things that I ever look forward to doing. But as you know, your environment has a huge impact on your creativity. So I still like it to be clean wherever I'm living and working. But now it doesn't have to be something that you deal with. If you're like me and you grew up in the 80s, you probably fantasized about the day when cleaning your house would be like it was for the Jetsons, meaning you don't have to lift a finger. Well, the good news is that we're already kind of living in that future. And the easiest way to make sure your floors are clean every day is with the iRobot Roomba Robot Vacuum. It cleans up after itself. The Clean Base automatic dirt disposal takes convenience to a new level, automatically empties its own bin into an allergen lock bag that holds 60 days of debris and traps 99% of pollen, mold, and dust mites, so you can forget about vacuuming for months at a time. Let the Roomba clean for you instead. It learns your home, finds dirt, and empties itself on its own. It's got powerful cleaning performance made effortless. Remember, if it's not from iRobot, it's not a Roomba. To learn more, go to irobot.com/unmistakable.
Oh yeah, I mean there's no question about that. I mean there's so many things that, so building the Instigator Experience website is a perfect example. I mean when people look at it and say who did the design and who wrote the copy, and you tell them two idiots like us, I think that's proof right there. I mean we didn't need a designer for it, and when a tool like Strikingly comes out and does that, you got to wonder how many people have they displaced with the fact that you don't need to be a skilled designer to design in Strikingly. You just have to have a bit of creativity.
Yeah, so if you have some level of creativity, what happens is that you can get further faster. Mm-hmm. And that's what you see on the web. And so we tout these examples, we tout these Kickstarter campaigns that, totally blew us away. And we tout, like a Twitter, somebody that opens a Twitter account and then next thing you know, they've got 1 million followers or whatever. But the reality is that those are rare instances, very, very rare instances. So while they're great examples of what these platforms can do, they're exceptionally rare. I mean, we have to acknowledge the fact that they are definitely rare, and I don't think that's going to change. I don't think there's going to be more and more examples. I think that the gap is just going to continue to widen over time.
Yeah, so then the question is there really anything we can do to either slow down, that gap widening, or at least, do something? I mean, because, that's a somewhat disheartening thesis if you think about it. It's depressing when you put it that way, and that doesn't make me happy to hear it, but you got to wonder, like, is there a way that we can at least, I mean, it's inevitable, we know that at this point, but is there a middle ground where, things, just even out a bit? I mean, one of the things that I've learned from you is that part of creating wealth is that it's not just a matter of creating wealth, but the fact that when you create wealth, you create jobs and you create opportunities, you put food on people's table. And that's something that really, honestly, never occurred to me until we started working together.
Wow, I sound like a 1%er. No, but you and I talk about that a lot. I think one of the greatest accomplishments of my life is actually the number of jobs that I've created, the number of reasonably paying jobs that I've created. And it's something I take great pride in that I've been able to do that, because I know the impact that has on other people's lives. And when you and I started talking, I'm like, hey, look what you're doing. Look at the money that you're able to pay someone else so that they can make a living. That's pretty cool. But I started to think about this from a different perspective, which is, I don't know about the idea of can we do something about the idea that the internet is the haves and the have-nots, but what I do wonder is does it matter as much? Mm-hmm. And I think that we're entering a new era where it doesn't matter as much. Of course, you have to have your basic needs met, but I wonder for instance, can you have a podcast that gets say 1,000 downloads per episode, which in the podcasting world isn't much at all, right? So you're relatively unknown, almost virtually unknown, but you're doing something you enjoy, mm-hmm. and you're talking to people that you like, and you're spending your hours and your time doing something you'd rather do than having a job that you hate doing. And so if you can actually function from that, like feed yourself, feed your family, that sort of thing, then to me, that's good enough. So while in the world of podcasting, if we took the angle of the haves and the have-nots, you are definitely a have-not compared to, say, somebody like Mark Maron who gets, 100,000 downloads per episode. Yet in the grand scheme of life, you're on the have side. Mm-hmm. You're doing something you enjoy doing. You're doing something that you love doing. And to me, we also have to consider that angle, which is you might not end up being in the top echelon of the internet world, but are you doing something that fulfills you somehow anyway?
Yeah, no, that's a very deep conversation, one that seems to keep coming up over and over in a lot of the chats I have with people. I mean, even it's really strange, but like the people who we consider, sort of heroes and role models and icons. I mean, some of the people we had on the show, they actually talk about that. It's really, it's bizarre, but they don't talk about, being in the upper echelon, but they talk about what you're talking about, the satisfaction that they get from doing it. And they say that if I didn't get that, I don't think I would be where I'm at. And that's interesting.
It is, and yet we always have that caveat, which you've mentioned before, which is, well, that's easy for you to say because sure. You're making a great living doing that, which is easy for another person to say who isn't. It's easy for them to say, that's easy for you to say.
Yeah.
So there is that dynamic in that angle. We cannot overlook the idea, the fundamental idea that people still need to fill some level of meaning and fulfillment. They still need to put food on their table. They still need to pay their bills, and they still need to live. Those things cannot be ignored in this conversation. Yet I wonder is if those basic needs can be met and you're doing something that you love, even if you're relatively unknown or you never reach the upper echelon in your industry, is that good enough? And in America, at least, we tend to think it's not. We tend to build a society on not good enough. Mm-hmm. Our entire society is built on that. Every single thing that you are buying is built on the fundamental idea that you are not good enough. That's why you went out and bought that, and that's how marketers market to us and advertisers advertise to us. But I'm starting to think that we might be switching to a world in which more and more people are saying this is good enough. Mm-hmm. This is good enough for me. And I read a really interesting article. I think it was in Fortune, maybe Forbes, a few years ago, and the journalist was interviewing a gentleman who had at the time the highest viewed YouTube channel that had the most subscriptions, and it was tons. It was like 26 million subscriptions to his YouTube channel, right? And they kept asking him if he wanted to be on television, and he kept saying, "No, why would I want to be on television? I get to do these videos. I get to directly interact with my audience every single day and know exactly what they want. And I get to spend no one else dictates what I do. I don't have to deal with producers or anyone else. I do them all on my own. And then I only get to spend 3 hours doing this, and then I go surfing." That was his answer, right? And the journalist couldn't understand. He couldn't grapple with the idea, and he kept asking the question in a different variety of ways to say, I don't get it. I don't understand why you don't want more. I don't understand why you don't want to be on television. I don't understand why you don't want your own show. And he kept saying, I don't understand why you don't understand. I'm doing everything I want to do in my life. This is good enough. I don't need more. And I think more and more we're entering that type of world.
Yeah, no doubts. I mean, it's funny. I'm staying with a friend here who was telling me about micro apartments in San Francisco. He said, man, you should go get yourself one of those places. He's like, it has a fold-up bed that turns into a desk that turns into a dining table. And I'm thinking, you're actually right. I don't need much more than that. And the truth is I don't want much more than that. I would, if I got to do this and afford that and got to surf, I would have everything I needed. And I think that is really, I think that really, the question becomes then, we get to this point where, okay, fine, some people are haves, some people are have-nots. It just doesn't matter as much as we thought it does anymore. Like, people don't care. They're like, I'm not going to let that determine the quality of my life.
Yeah, I think we're approaching that. I think we're at the early stages of that, and we'll see where it goes. I also think that a lot of people say that, but they don't necessarily mean that, or they still have a lot of envy, or they still have a lot of reaching for the stars mentality. So I don't know. We'll see where it goes. But and for the record, being a 1%er, I want a huge king size bed. I just want to put that on the record. I don't want a fold up bed that turns into my dining table.
Well, I mean, you have slept on couches for the last 3 years, so I don't blame you for that.
That is true. I don't think I'm ever going to sleep on a couch again. I don't even care if my wife is upset at me and kicks me out of the bedroom. You know, I'm not sleeping on a couch ever again for the rest of my life. I'm pretty sure.
All right, well, I think that makes a rather fitting end. So let's look at our iTunes reviews and give some quick shout outs.
Yeah, real quick before you do that, I'd love people think, what's the address where they can write in?
Unmistakablecreative.com/contact. So write in, tell us, is this an all or nothing internet? Is the internet a developing country? And, how are we going to develop it better?
Is it going to change? How can we change it? Should we change it?
Yeah. All right. iTunes reviews. Got one from Quick Walker. I found this podcast through a friend of mine. I've been listening ever since. These are inspiring people in the world who do inspiring things. And Mr. Rao does a great job of presenting their stories in a casual, off-the-cuff manner. That's the first time I've been called Mr. Rao in an iTunes review.
Mr. Rao seems very professional. I like it.
I expect you to call me Mr. Rao in all our meetings from now on.
I will do that, sir.
So another one, Unthink. This is from BadStar07. Srini introduced me to a new way of thinking that I always had in me. I used to go after projects for money alone. The extraordinary people he interviews have opened up my eyes to a whole new meaning of creativity and purpose. Love that. That's the kind of impact we love to have. Mr. Salim, exceptionally well done. The thing I value most is the sincerity Srini and co-host Greg Hartle, a.k.a. the Jack Bauer of the internet, share with their listeners. So I know you have something to say about that, so say it.
Well, I just think it's absolutely hilarious every time I hear this whole Jack Bauer of the internet, because I've never actually watched an episode of 24 and I'm never on the internet. So I just think it's kind of funny how somehow I've become the Jack Bauer of the internet.
That's because we would call you if we needed to defuse a bomb or do just about anything else.
Yeah, I also think that's kind of funny because, of course, I don't know how to defuse a bomb. But I do understand. People call me because I know who to call. So, of course, I'm not going to do anything. I'm going to look at the bomb and go, I have no idea what that is or what to do about it. But then I'm going to make some calls.
Yeah, you'll know the 100+ people that need to make things happen. You may not get into any fights, although we know you have been in a few. I don't imagine Jack Bauer style gunfights, but in the final minute, we'll all be dependent on you.
Great.
We'll all be saying, okay, Greg, what do we do next?
And of course, you'll have to wake me up from my nap to tell me that.
All right, one last iTunes review. Tokyo Frank. I'm not sure how I found this podcast originally, but I'm glad I did. Srini's a great interviewer. Thanks for that. Keep those iTunes reviews coming. They make a world of difference in our ability not only to bring you guys guests that are different than you'll hear on any other podcast. They help with our sponsors, which keep the show running and allow us to keep operating and bringing you the best stuff we can. So write in, tell us what you think about this whole debate of if the internet is moving toward turning into a developing country, or it already is one. Unmistakablecreative.com/contact, and we will see you guys next week.
Thanks for listening in on another candid conversation at the Unmistakable Creative. Embrace your inner misfit. Express your creative voice. And remember, the goal isn't to live forever, but to create something that will.